would like to thank TUC for this great opportunity. It is a great honor to be able to present on this topic at the end of Advent. And the topic today is silent light, and we're going to explore it through the art of Christina Rossetti and Edward Burne-Jones. But before we begin, I would like to talk about what Advent means to me and why I chose this topic specifically, how the two connect with each other. So I feel that for me personally, Advent is about stillness before revelation. It is the quiet, often cold time of year when we learn to pause, to wait. And it's not only the expectation for the birth of Christ, but it's training of the heart to recognize light after darkness. And I personally connect to Advent as a kind of spiritual pause where absence and anticipation coexist. This is exactly what drew me to these two artists because they too seem to understand that the divine enters us, enters the world through stillness and beauty. So both of them, Christina and Edward Burne-Jones, are two of some of the most prominent Victorian artists. So before we begin, let's learn a little bit about who they are and why they matter. So with Christina Rossetti, at first, she was one of the most significant devotional poets of the Victorian age. She was born into the artistic Anglo-Italian family in London of Rossettis, where everybody was an artist in their own way. She was the sibling of the painter and poet Dante Gabriel Rossetti, who was the founder of the Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood. And while her brother and his circle pursued beauty through sensuous color, medieval imagery, a lot of Greek resonances, she herself shaped her own art by this austere and deeply personal faith. She was raised within the Anglican High Church tradition, and this was closely related to the Oxford movement, and they sought to restore, for example, spiritual seriousness, ritual, sacramental depth in the Church of England. To add to this, I would like to say that even though she is known as a devotional poet, she too, sometimes being called one of the Pre-Raphaelite sisterhood, would transgress and write some controversial poetry, but that is a topic for another day, so we're not going to dwell on that. So her spirituality was both passionate and restrained. And in her life, she turned down two marriage proposals, one because her suitor was a Roman Catholic and she was a devout Anglican, and the other because the man lost his Christian faith and chose to be an atheist. So she decided to turn them both down based on religious differences. So this fidelity to conscience echoes through her poetry, where the voice of longing, renunciation, and redemption are a recurring and central motif. And her works, such as Advent or In the Bleak Midwinter and A Better Resurrection, reveal her preoccupation with the preparation, the humility, and the meeting of divine grace with human limitation. So she saw poetry as a form of worship, and her task was not to glorify self, but to articulate the soul's encounter with God. Her devotional writings also reflect the Victorian fascination with time and eternity, and Advent for her particularly was not only the liturgical waiting for Christ's birth, but also the perpetual spiritual state of expectation of preparing the heart for a God who continually enters the world. Even her most tender carols carry this quiet theological intensity in them. They balance the emotional immediacy with the discipline of faith. So she remained active in charitable work through her entire life. She volunteered at St. Mary Magdalene House of Charity for Fallen Women in Highgate, And this is a testament to her belief in compassion and redemption through grace. Her religious sensibility was not just sentimental, and it was also very rigorous. So she regarded suffering, patience, waiting as sacred disciplines through which divine love is made visible. And we can see this clearly articulated in a lot of her work. Moving on, let's talk about Edward Burne-Jones. So he was a knight, he was a sir, which is pretty cool. But again, he is one of the better known, one of the best known painters of the Victorian era. And he was also one of the Pro-Raphaelite brothers. So he was a friend of Dante Gabriel Rossetti. So him and Rossetti, Christina, they met, they spent time together, they were friends. And the Pre-Raphaelite school of art has kind of two directions, and one of them is called the Burne-Jonesian because he had this particular style, very beautiful, if you ask me. So we'll see. Anyway, moving forward, so he was born in Birmingham, and he was born to a very modest family. He initially studied theology at Oxford, and he kind of planned to become a clergyman. But then he met William Morris, one of the other Pre-Raphaelites, and they formed this lifelong friendship, and this friendship redirected both of the men to the arts, towards the arts. So Burne-Jones eventually abandoned the ministry, but he retained his profound spiritual sensibility that fueled his art with mystical depth and moral beauty for basically his entire life. So his early influences included medieval legends, early Renaissance art, and the symbolic grandeur of Christian iconography. And we can clearly see a lot of these influences in many of his prominent works. So he, being one of the Pre-Raphaelites, spent a lot of time under the mentorship of Dante Gabriel Rossetti and developed this style marked by elongated figures, subdued color harmonies, and you could say an atmosphere of stillness, because these qualities lend his religious works a contemplative intensity rather than just dramatic realism. He has several works. We're going to talk about the Nativity today, but he also has another one called The Star of Bethlehem. Both were painted in the late 1880s, and they exemplify his fusion of aesthetic idealism with theological meditation. So though Burne-Jones's later years saw him move away from formal religion, his art continued to reflect a reverence for transcendence and moral purity. And he once remarked that he sought to paint the pictures of the soul, which is such a beautiful thing to say. So he was trying to capture not just the external events, but the inward state of grace. His figures, the women that he draws, are usually very angelic, solemn, often enclosed within soft golden light, and they embody a yearning for spiritual perfection amid human imperfection. So, in the Nativity, which we will discuss today, this yearning appears as a serene humility, and the divine moment is rendered through harmony and silence rather than a spectacle. So, in a broader sense, if we are to discuss Burne-Jones, he represents the Victorian reconciliation of beauty and belief. His work offers us a visual theology of gentleness, you could say, and here we can see that light and color and form become sacraments of hope for the author. And even though he eventually ended up distancing himself from institutional religion, his art remained haunted by moral and aesthetic ideals of Christianity, and it emphasized a lot of the time redemption, compassion, the transformative power of love. But enough about the authors, so let's talk a little bit about the works. You will be given the poems. So I hope you can take a look at them while I explain them, and I will show you the Nativity, the painting, after we're done talking about it, or rather, when we are talking about it. So first of all, let's talk about Advent, which is Christina Rossetti's poem. It was published in 1858, and it captures the spiritual atmosphere of the season through not just festivity, but through the austerity of waiting. The poem opens with the image of cold, clear Advent moon and nights that seem unending at times. So, for example, lines like, "This Advent moon shines cold and clear, this Advent nights are long." It is a world that is stripped bare. It is quieted of excess. And Rossetti uses this wintry landscape as a mirror for the human soul. And this is a soul that recognizes its own emptiness and prepares for renewal. The imagery of frost, darkness, and stillness evokes what the church calls the penitential season of Advent, a time of inward cleansing and reflection rather than pure celebration. In Rossetti's understanding, the preparation for Christ's coming is less about outward ceremony and more about the slow, humble work of transformation, of repentance and watchfulness. Her speaker calls herself to wakefulness, echoing the biblical call to keep watch for the coming of the Lord. Um, and The tone is pretty introspective and disciplined, but beneath the restraint runs a quiet current of longing. The poem is simple, and its simplicity, such as the short lines, um, recurring monosyllables, a rhythm almost similar to a prayer, all of these underscore the sense of devout waiting. Rossetti's faith, which, as I told you already, was shaped by the Anglican High Church movement, favored self-examination, confession, and renewal. And Advent embodies all three of these. So the moonlight and frost become symbols of divine clarity, cold, perhaps, but pure at the same time. And they prepare the soul for warmth that is yet to come. Um, so moving on, let's talk about her other poem. So if Advent, the first one that we discuss, is about waiting, then the second one, in the bleak midwinter, kind of contemplates fulfillment, and at the same time, fulfillment is presented with the same modest tone. It's a later poem. If Advent was written in 58, this is from 72, so nearly 15 years apart. And the poem opens on a kind of cosmic scale. So heaven and earth shall flee away when he comes to reign. But it immediately turns to the tender image of a child born in a stable, surrounded by straw and breath and snow. Rossetti balances the grandeur of incarnation with a profound kind of sort of humility. God's infinite majesty chooses to dwell in the simplest of circumstances, and the contrast between heaven's power and earthly poverty is the paradox at the heart of Advent. So the starkness of winter here is not merely environmental. It represents the condition into which grace descends. Rossetti transforms frost and cold into signs of spiritual tenderness, where warmth is not denied, but it is something to be awaited. The poem's most famous final stanza resolves the cosmic tension into a deeply personal devotion. What can I give him, poor as I am? Give my heart. This is Rossetti's theology in miniature. You could say salvation as a relationship of love, freely offered, not earned. The incarnation invests not grandeur, but response, not splendor, but sincerity. What a beautiful poem. And I am hoping to be there when we're having this class, so we'll try to read it together. Anyway, moving forward to Burne-Jones's painting, The Nativity. Here you can see it in the background, but I'll show it to you a little later in its full glory. So these these three works are kind of connected. And when we read the poems alongside the Nativity, they share kind of a profound theological stillness. So both Rossetti and Burne-Jones reject the spectacle in favor of inward vision. Their advent is not marked by motion of triumph. It is rather reverent quiet, where holiness is found in humility. So Burne-Jones's painting here, the Virgin and the angels bow in a contemplative silence. And in Rossetti's poetry, the speaker kneels in interior prayer. Both envision hope as something that dawns slowly. You could say a light within shadow, a beauty born out of restraint. And their works remind us that waiting for far from being, passive, is in and of itself an act of faith, a prayer, if you will, an opening of the heart so that love may enter. So let's discuss the painting first of all. It was created in 1887, so it's a pretty late Victorian work, you could say. It is one of the most contemplative and emotionally resonant religious works from the Victorian era. Art-wise. And it was created for the Church of Saint John the Apostle in Torquay, I think. I'm not sure how to pronounce that location name. Sorry about that. And it was a commission from his friend and collaborator, William Morris, whose name we already discussed earlier. And although Burne-Jones was not an overtly doctrinal kind of artist, this piece distills the theological heart of Advent, the mystery of divine presence emerging in silence, tenderness, human vulnerability. At first glance, the Nativity seems kind of deceptively simple, and the Holy Family is gathered in quiet intimacy. Mary kneels before the sleeping Christ child, her face shadowed by reverence and awe. And while Joseph stands protectively beside her, on one hand resting upon his staff, behind them. So three angels kneel in adoration, the vast folding wings enclosing the scene like a sanctuary. There is no crowd of shepherds, no star blazing overhead, no spectacle at all. Instead, Burne-Jones offers a composition of contained reverence. So every line curves inward, every gesture draws the viewer towards the center, where the light and divinity rest in the fragile form of the child. The work's color palette is kind of dull. You've got a lot of muted blues, grays, dusky golds, and this kind of gradient, I suppose, embodies the tone of the Advent itself. It's somber, yet it's full of expectation. It's pregnant with expectation, if you will. Unlike many earlier depictions of Nativity bathed in celestial radiance, the scene glows gently as though it is illuminated from within, you could say, and the light seems to emanate from Christ's body, softening the faces of those who behold him. So the subtle radiance is emblematic of Burne-Jones's theology of beauty. The divine is not imposed upon the world, but it emerges gently from within it. So the figures, as always, in a very Burne-Jonesian style, are kind of elongated and idealized. Their gestures are slow, they're deliberate. The sense of stillness, almost sculptural in its restraint. So this reflects his lifelong fascination with spiritual poise. He once said that he wanted to paint a beautiful dream, both of reverence and the long patience of faith. And the Nativity is precisely that dream, a vision of devotion purified of sentimentality. Mary's bowed head conveys not ecstasy, but rather meditation, and her posture is that of a contemplation, not triumph. The angels, too, are very hushed in prayer. They're holding the scrolls and their mouths are still not moving. Their message of glory is very internalized here. It is embodied in posture and not really proclaimed in sound, you could say. So let's see. Yeah. Moving forward, kind of skipped some of that. Um, let's talk a little bit about to sum it up, perhaps we could say that the most striking aspect in the Nativity is the silence. And this is, you can see, well, you can feel a profound sense that sound has withdrawn to make room for mystery. The figures communicate through stillness, and the viewer is invited into that same contemplative place of quiet. This silence is not emptiness, though. It's rather fullness. So the stillness before dawn, you could say, the breath before a song. And in this way, the painting becomes a sort of a visual prayer. It is inviting us to also experience this prayer, to experience Advent as this poised anticipation. So when we place all of these works together, the two poems and this painting, which is, oops, here, we can see that the visual embodiment of divine humility here in Nativity is kind of completing the inward preparation of Advent and the tender fulfillment of in the bleak midwinter. Both artists kind of remind us that holiness rarely arrives in spectacle, but it rather begins in stillness, in the heart's quiet readiness to receive. One surprise for me when I was doing a little bit of research on these works for this class is how quiet Advent is in the works of these two artists. There really is no triumph and no loud joy. The only thing you can feel at the end is the soft, reverent attention and this restraint kind of challenged my own expectation of Advent as purely celebratory. And I think I realized that waiting can be a sacred kind of thing, that silence itself is a form of faith. And I hope that you may notice how gentle light and gentle language can carry immense theological weight. That through muted tones and simple words, both Burne-Jones and Christina Rossetti may remind us that Advent's beauty it lies in preparation, humility, and hope, unfulfilled, but yet very certain. And my invitation to you through this class is to let Advent be slow. Let it be quiet enough to hear your own longing for renewal, like the figures in Burne-Jones's paintings or the speaker in Rossetti's poems. May we learn to wait faithfully and to offer what we can, even if all we can give is our heart. Thank you very much. And here are the discussion questions, which we will be having in this class. Let me just read them very quickly. You don't have to do all of them, whichever one, maybe split in groups and discuss one per person, such as in both the painting and poetry, silence seems central. How do stillness and restraint express expectation or faith to you? What colors or images stand out to you in the Nativity or the poems, and how do they shape your sense of Advent? And Rossetti's speaker ends with a personal gift, give my heart. What might that line mean for us in a modern context, do you think? And how does Burne-Jones's depiction of the Holy Family differ from the Nativity images we see today? What does that say about Victorian spirituality to you? How do you perceive it? And finally, in both, well, in all three of these works, Advent is a balance of cold and warmth and absence and presence. How might this duality mirror your own experience of waiting or hope? I hope these questions might be able to lead you towards a new way of seeing yourself, a new way of understanding Advent. And I hope you enjoyed the class and have a lovely rest of your day. Thank you very much.